Hello, and welcome to week two. Week two actually started on Monday. However, it has been one of those weeks. I hope that your weeks are going better than my first 2 days of this week have been going. But it's Wednesday, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to let you know that if you go under assignments, you'll be able to see what you should be doing this week. This week is week two. We'll be exploring mainstream realism with James's The Art of Realism, and of course, Chestnut's The Passing of Grandison, Paul Laurence Dunbar's The Lyrics of Lowly Life, and of course, Joel Harris from the Uncle Remus stories. If you also want to go ahead and take a look, if you want to go ahead and also take a look under the assignments area under week two, you also see that there's a podcast and there's some other information for you. Please feel free to explore each of these areas and let me know if you have any questions. In fact, I see that there are two questions here. Um, we also, from Christina. Christina, thanks for posting. For the week two, it should be the Art of Realism. The Art of Fiction is also in there. I will check and make sure that both of your textbooks and my textbooks are the same edition. But thanks for asking. Also, day and time is discussion boards. I'm really kind of loose with that, and I do that purposefully because I do want to give you the opportunity to have those discussions. First and foremost, I do recommend having your initial discussion posted by Thursday or Friday of that week, and then using the Saturday and Sunday to respond to your peers, as you do need for the full 100 points to have both an initial posting and a response. So, best operating practice is post your initial one by Wednesday or Thursday, and then post your response by Sunday. However, as long as you have everything prepared so that Monday morning when I go in to look, it's all there, I'm perfectly happy with that. Thank you so much for asking those questions, though. I appreciate it, Christina. I also see that we've had some really robust discussion under our local color realism area, and I want to take some opportunities to go through it. First, starting with Tammy. Tammy's posting is exactly what we need a posting to be. She picked a theme from our discussion board, which was literary realism, and she defined it. She then went through and looked at each of the stories and explained how she connected these stories with aspects of realism. And I think that that is really what we're looking at. Um, you're thinking about not just giving a summary, but you're really thinking about telling us, your readers and your peers, what you think about these stories and also the grouping that they're put in. And I think that, as I mentioned, that Tammy did a great job with that. I also love that Robert really popped in and gave some good observations and connections from his reading with, of course, the reading that Tammy gave. And that is ideally what we should all be doing at this level. In addition, Ralph Hornsby, I like that you mentioned more of a kind of a connection with the readings and you really focused on your reading process. And this is good. Most of the times when we're reading literature, we're either going to focus on how it made us feel or what we see in the work. And I do think that Ralph, in his reading, really did focus on that connection. And Tammy and, of course, Natalia, in their responses, did kind of connect also with that process of reading. With Tammy, it was the dialect, which, of course, is a little bit bizarre in this text. And, of course, Natalia did too. Sharon also picked in with her expression that she was getting a headache. And, honestly, the dialect is such a thing in local color realism. It's such a trope or a tenet that often I don't see it anymore, but now I do understand completely, especially as Deborah also popped in, that it is very difficult to kind of engage it. I highly recommend reading it aloud. I think that is a super helpful way to kind of get comfortable with the dialect. Michael mentioned that the stories use the techniques of realism, and I like that he focused on those techniques. Michael, I would have liked to see a little bit of information or at least a connection to the readings. For instance, what aspects of these readings or these stories do you think really focused on the plot and the story arc, driving the surrounding environment into the background? Um, I think that Christina and also Ralph did a good job of engaging it. In fact, I really appreciate that Ralph pulled in Roman Fever from Edith Wharton so that he could maybe think about how he could connect these observations with the readings. And Tony, I appreciate your observations and your connections too, and the idea of the period playing an important role with the readers and also the creators of this fiction. Um, Tammy, also another good post, also very focused on picking a trope and then explaining how it connects to these stories. I love your reading of The Storm. I think you did an excellent job of kind of integrating it. And thanks, Christopher, for your response back. I like that you kind of mentioned the reference of Assumption, Louisiana, and that you kind of got this like almost detective quality to the story. And really, when we're reading stories or works from outside of our time period and also outside of our geographical region, we will also often have to play that detective role. Natalia, thank you so much for your connection with realism and also with you offering the opposition, which often is romanticism. Now, I do think that you do a good job of connecting both The Storm and Ambrose Bierce's Chickamauga. The focus in Chickamauga on the brutality of war, you really do pick up here and connect it to the tenets of realism. I like that Manru also focused on pulling your reading of The Storm in to his response, and then he really focused on the idea of the ethics and the control of the time. And this is a key element. At this time, women were not as liberated nor as free as they are at this period in time. And so we have to think about what this text says about this specific time period. And I like that you brought that out. As Christina did in her posting, she really took it to exactly where it needs to be. And Christina, you made my little heart, my teacher heart go pitter patter because you really did focus on the emphasis on characterization more than plot. Remember in realism that it is about the character development, the moral development, the kind of the day-to-day texture of that character that is often more important, or at least it overrides or rules plot. And I love that Christina focused on that, specifically in her reading of the Battle of Chickamauga, or Chickamaugas, as Ambrose Bierce put it. She also did an excellent job of really thinking about how each of these stories are in conversation with each other. And ultimately, that is what we're doing, is we're looking to see what these texts can say and to us and say to each other. And Darcella, I love that you connected with the notion and the process of reading Chickamauga not just once but twice. And I think that, as Chandrika pointed out, really engaging in active reading involves more than one reading. It involves often two, maybe even three times. But the enjoyment each time is made richer and more fuller because of that act. Sharon mentioned in her posting that the backgrounds of the authors, or the biography of the authors, really does contribute to the understanding of the story, not just the creation of the story. And that is so true. In fact, biographical criticism really does focus on the influence of the author with the actual text. And if you focus on, like Joel Chandler's Harris story, the wonderful Tar Baby story, as Sharon did, you will see that it really does focus on the aspects of story that were important in his period of time, not just in ours. And I think that that's a valid claim. Plus, I think Sharon did a magnificent job of posting and engaging the literature. Robert, I really appreciate your connections to the readings and also your attempt to really engage both the story's plot, the setting, and of course the feeling that was created. Your reading of The Luck of the Roaring Camp was one of the best in the class, and I like that you really think not just about summary, but also about how to connect it overall. And I think you did a fantastic job with that. And I do also like your reading of Kate Chopin. I think The Storm is an interesting text, and it does have a lot of tense moments and realistic moments, and you really did focus on those well. Tony, thank you for pointing out that the principles of realism really are portrayed excellently in these readings. I think that's a key element, is to consider how do these works really put into conversation and even into debate how we look at realism and how we look at local color. And I think that you really do focus well on that. I like that you also pull in some of your biographical information in order to enrich the reading, because the reality of the situation for realism and local realism colors is it's about capturing the texture of experience of that time for all time, and you really do capture that well in your post. Christopher, thanks so much for your honest and well structured response. I love the statement. To understand these readings, I first had to understand what realism actually meant, and you took it not as what it means to us now in 2014, but what it would have meant in the 1800s. And I think that that is a key. As you mentioned, that transition also between individuality and into commonality, or kind of the archetype of a person, is also a key element of realism, and I appreciate your pointing that out. I also think Darcella's points about Ambrose Pierce and, of course, Edith Wharton's Roman Fever were key. Roman Fever is an interesting text. I do think it deserves a bit more focus than it has, as it does kind of capture a very realistic portrayal of morals and implications of conduct, as Monocle pointed out. Um, and I like that, the expression of frustration with Chickamauga was also something that you guys could share. Chickamauga is a more difficult text than most, and I do appreciate you wrestling with it. Monica, I love that you mentioned that really it wasn't until you realized the positionality of the boy being deaf, and that this kind of almost textual experience around him was something that really enriched that experience. I also thought your reading of The Wonderful Tar Baby and how Mr. Rabbit was too sharp for Mr. Fox was great. And I appreciate the emphasis on local color realism that I also saw in Deborah's post. Um, Although I think that, Deborah, you really do need to develop your posting a bit more, I would strongly recommend that you take a look at some of your peers and you can see the depth and breadth that they've been focusing on. And I really think that you could be engaged to develop a little bit more. Chandraka, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I think you also could use a little bit more development. I do see that you are thinking about what the stories say in reference to the lesson, but I think a bit more development would make this a stronger posting. Um, Jamalia, also hope I'm pronouncing that correct. I think you did a great job of thinking about the stories, but I would like to hear a little bit more about how they connect to realism and maybe showing a little bit of evidence from the actual text to support your observations. And then, of course, Manru, thank you so much for your posting. I think that your focus on realism and logic and deep and vivid meanings is a key element. I also think that you mentioned the idea is of Chickamauga being a very American story in relation to other cultures, such as you mentioned the Chinese. I also enjoyed your connection with the Storm, Kate Chopin's story. Overall, though, I think you all did a great job. As I mentioned, for the future, you will want to take a look at assignments, and then, of course, you can take a look under Week 2, Mainstream Realism and African American Realism. I'd recommend reading the little overview, and then, of course, going into assignments and taking a look at the podcast 2 under Week 2. If you do have any questions, comments, or observations, I'd be more than happy to help. I look forward to continuing to learn with you, and I hope that your weeks are going well. Have a great day.